Hey there, my name is Crystal Hoban, aka Crystal Clear Mystic, and I'm going to talk today about something I've been noticing pretty collectively across the board with clients. So there's been this kind of shift that's been occurring. I think like majority of us collectively are experiencing this kind of like unconscious like surfacing of anything that keeps us small. So this could be relationships that keep you small. This could be an overwhelm of emotions because we're not expressing them and we're suppressing them instead. This could be frustration with yourself for like not putting yourself out there in the way that you want to reach your goals, right? This can be across the board in many different ways. But I've noticed collectively that everybody is kind of experiencing this kind of like feeling of like, it's like a complete distress around feeling small. So anything that is making us feel small, we are rejecting. We are getting angry. We're getting irritable. That's something I really noticed with clients this week, especially clients who are struggling to make the changes to not be small. They have started to move into this phase of being angry and frustrated and irritable. And it's interesting because we had this conversation about like how anger is sadness's bodyguard. So we feel anger as a way to protect ourselves from feeling that vulnerability of sadness, right? Like we don't want to feel that. So anger instead is what we choose to feel, or is something that happens over time of suppressing that sadness over and over and over again. And so eventually we get irritable, we get frustrated, we get angry, right? We lash out. We kind of hit that threshold. And that really is just information that we are, feeling like sadness. We're feeling rejected. We're feeling judged. We're feeling criticized, right? But instead of like feeling the sadness or feeling the emotions underneath, we usually will turn to anger. And one of the things that I think about when I talk about this subject is the feelings iceberg. So a while ago, I used to work with kids and we used to work with this iceberg. And I don't know how much you know about icebergs, but 25% of the iceberg is above the water, right? That you can actually see, which is why when the Titanic hit it, it hit the underneath part thinking it missed it, but tanked it, right? 75% of the iceberg is underneath the water. So the iceberg that's above the water in the feelings iceberg from this example is anger, frustration, annoyance, right? Being pissed, right? That is like above the water. And then underneath the water is shame, anger, shame, grief, sadness, right? Rejection, hurt. So wounding, anything along those lines of like sadness is underneath the water. So that's the 75% that most of us suppress or that is submerged underneath the water, right? With the iceberg example. And, this idea that we are feeling so much distress around remaining small and feeling like we need to make these changes to kind of like be able to be different. Like it's getting to a point where it's like, and I said this to a client today, you're keeping quiet for short-term discomfort and you're choosing long-term dysfunction. So you're making a choice, right? The choice is between short-term discomfort, uncomfortability for a little while, for this long-term dysfunction that is in this relationship that now we want to change this after years and years of being this way feels almost impossible and feels really difficult, right? And so the reality is like when you make yourself really small in relationships, to change that or to be bigger or to kind of stand ground more or want to take up more space in the relationships, I mean, the reality is those relationships that you accepted when you kept yourself small, you probably made yourself even smaller in those relationships because there was no space for you in those relationships to be that bigger person, that larger person, to take up a lot of space. A lot of the times when we make ourselves small, we choose relationships that also fit that belief about ourselves. So now you're realizing that you're uncomfortable. You don't want to remain small anymore. You want to take up more space, right? But the reality is a lot of these relationships are going to have a difficult time shifting with you in that space so that you can be different. They're going to have a hard time growing with you, but they're also, some of them are not going to be able to grow with you. Some of them are not going to have space for you to be able to step out. And this is like the hard thing, I think, about personally my spiritual awakening. And I think spiritual awakenings in general, but also like just like growth and change, right? As we grow and change, there are certain things that can come with us and there's certain things that can't come with us. And, you know, when it comes to relationships, especially when we've kept ourselves small and meek and little, you know, this idea that we want to grow and change and be different because, well, that's what we're supposed to do as humans, right? It doesn't always have space for that. The relationships that we created in that space reflect who we were and what we were. And so though they can't always come with us. We can't always change in those spaces. And so you got to make a choice. Are you going to choose to stay small and you're cool with that? Or are you going to choose to take up space, see what happens, and see how that person responds and make a choice to either be cool with that or walk away, right? I think that's like the hard part for people. When you do decide that you don't want to remain small anymore and you do start taking up space, how that other person responds to that is information about them. It has nothing to do with you. But as humans, we take that on, right? I'm too much. I'm dramatic, right? I'm selfish. I'm too big of a personality, right? None of that is actually true. You've just outgrown that relationship. You've outgrown that dynamic that doesn't fit for who you are anymore. But instead of acknowledging that there's maybe something outside of ourselves that's causing this issue, we automatically turn it inward. Well, I must be too much. I must be too sensitive. I must be whatever, right? And the reality is we outgrow things. Relationships come into our lives to teach us something about ourselves. They come into our lives to walk with us through certain seasons of life. Not every single one of them is meant to stay. And not every single one of them can handle all the different versions of ourselves that we are going to become or that we grow into, right? And this is why you kind of hear in relationships like we grew apart. Sometimes that does happen. If someone's not willing to grow with you or accept your growth as a part of your process, then yeah, we grow apart. But if we can choose to have understanding and compassion for someone else's growth and make the changes that need to happen to continue on a similar path forward, then it doesn't have to happen that way, right? It's interesting how relationships change over the course of your life, and I'm sure many of you have probably seen and experienced that and have your own experiences with that as well. But this year has really been about learning to not stay silent, not shove our feelings, right? Not choose dysfunction over short-term discomfort. It's really been about learning to stand confidently in who we are, learning to take up space even when it's uncomfortable, right? And I think sometimes it just shows that you've outgrown certain environments and that's about it. It's really nothing else other than that. But how we choose to make meaning of these things, what we choose to tell ourselves about these things, how we choose to see ourselves associated with these situations, right? It really does affect everything. It really does. So, you know, this idea that we need to keep ourselves small to maintain our lives, yeah, you do for that version of your life. But that version of your life doesn't have to be your life unless you decide it to be, unless you choose it to be, right? And the choice is always yours. So one of the ways I have been talking to a specific client about maybe finding a way to speak up, a way to take up more space, because communication verbally feels really difficult for this person. And also, it doesn't always turn out well. I had mentioned, maybe writing a letter, right? So you write a letter, you write all the stuff you feel and think and want to say, and then you finish that letter. And then you write another letter. And in this letter, you make sure it's empathetic, kind, compassionate. It gets your point across. You use I statements. So I feel this way when this happens, right? Not using you in those sentences. And you kind of call out the patterns and what you've been noticing and talk about how to change it, right? But we burn the first letter, right? We get our feelings out, we process our feelings, we put it somewhere, right? We don't put it at that person, but we put it somewhere, we burn that. And then we write another letter that's respectful, kind, and can actually be received. And I think in this way of kind of moving through this, it gives space for that person to process and then have their own feelings within their own time and space, and then come to you when they're ready to discuss it further. And it also helps for people who kind of like shut down in conversations, or like people who really do feel small. Sometimes it's really hard for you to stand up and say something. As soon as like there is a response back towards you, or you don't hear what you want to hear, there's an immediate clam up, right? So this is another way to kind of like move through that differently. And so it was just a suggestion I had for a client today, but it really got me thinking about like the different ways to be able to communicate and work through these things. And obviously that's not going to work for everybody, and that's totally okay. But there's so many different ways to kind of like shift through things if you are open to trying them, open to figuring them out, open to thinking of them, right? But I really wanted to come on here today and just talk about something I've been noticing collectively in general about that, like keeping yourself small. And who's that serving? Is that serving you? Or are we doing that to serve others? And then ask yourself, is that really what you want for your life? Is that really how you want to live your life? Are you cool with that? Because if you're cool with that, then cool. But if you're not, then maybe it's time to make some changes in that space for you. Maybe it's time to do something different. Maybe it's time to choose yourself. I am Crystal Hoban, aka Crystal Clear Mystic, and I offer Embodied Empowerment Coaching. And in these sessions, I help you to recognize what you are ready to do right now to start moving towards the life that you want to lead and who you want to be. And we work on helping you to find your inner confidence, build self-trust, find what it is that you want to do and brings you so much joy and passion and happiness in this life. And together we create a plan on how to get you there and how to start moving you in that direction so that you can reach your highest potential and really your highest timeline and bring true happiness in your life on a day-to-day basis. My goal is always to make sure that I'm meeting you where you're at so that you can have these things to make moves on and goals to do that actually are accessible for you. So if this is something that interests you, you can find information on my website and book through there. And I would love to help you transform yourself and become your most confident self to be able to take that life that you really want to live and make it your reality. Love and light.